Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Heysal podcast in Rome. I'm very excited to present today's guest. We have a British author, a homeschool teacher, and an ex-actress, Kate Nicholls. Welcome.
Thank you.
How are you?
I'm very well. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm very excited to have you on the show. What's your background or biography in a nutshell, let's say?
In a nutshell, I mean, I was raised in England. My dad was an actor, and I had a career as an actress, and I had kids in England, and then I decided to move to Botswana with my 5 children.
Wow.
And we moved there in 1996, and I raised my eldest daughter at that time was 17, and my youngest was still on the tit. He was 1 and a bit. And I arrived in this little town just below the Okavango Delta with 5 children, and we lived there for the next 11, 12 years. So they were raised there.
Wow.
I worked for an organisation called Women Against Rape for a long time, very early days. It was a nascent NGO and run by a bunch of enthusiastic volunteers. It's now a serious organisation run by Botswana men and women. So that kind of gave me an insight into Botswana that was very raw. It wasn't a kind of out of Africa, sipping gin and tonics under an acacia tree story. It was real gritty stuff. And then we moved into a lion research camp, and we ran. I was co-researcher for, I think it must have been 9 or 10 years there. So my kids were raised under a tree in the Okavango Delta, and I homeschooled all of them. It was incredible. It was, and not planned. I mean, this happened. And this is what I love about walking through doors that open, never say no.
So you just decided one day to leave England back then?
I decided to leave England because I felt, and I don't think I was wrong, I felt that things were changing in a way that made me feel a little bit uncomfortable. And what worried me is that we live in an rapidly changing society. We're slap bang in the middle of the technological revolution. We're about to hit the nano revolution, the graphene revolution. That's going to change our lives too. And we need to be astute and alert and questioning. But at the same time, I felt that we were also losing those basic skills, particularly children, who have in the past played such an important role within a family. They've had jobs to do. They've worked on the land. They've brought in the cows or the goats, or they've milked. They've been, but it's very difficult to integrate children in a highly technological environment. And so I took them to Africa, and I wanted them to be raised in a developing country, and not just to be visiting and observing, but to actually be living and participating and putting their roots down, and understanding the conditions that the majority of the world population live with. Most people don't have running water. A lot of people still don't have access to electricity. Profound levels of poverty. And being part of that and not observing in a kind of, isn't it tragic way, but no, it was their life, it was their world. And it set them up, and it gave them a robustness and compassion, and it challenged them creatively. We didn't have access. We didn't have electricity, for goodness sake. We had solar panels, and and it was their job to turn the solar panels. And if they forgot, then we didn't have lights at night. Simple as that. You know, the panels had to follow the journey of the sun throughout the day. So we didn't have access to technology. And I'm not romantic about that. Mm-hmm. It was amazing. But I think that had we had access to technology, it would have been even better. I'm not a kind of peace, love, dope. You know, we've all got to commune and hug trees. Okay. Though we should, of course, be loving trees. But you know what I'm trying to say. Sure. I think the combination of the two is really important. And the minute that that became available to them, they became almost immediately fluent, as did I. And now, when I'm teaching, I carried on homeschooling because I love it. So once my kids all went off to university, I started teaching other kids as well. And I'm here in Rome. I have a homeschool program where either I teach over Skype, which means that I can access children all over the world, which is fantastic. Wow. Or I have kids that come to stay with me, just one or two at a time, so they get a real proper home environment. But the internet is incredibly exciting, incredibly important tool. And very often, I'm sorry, I'm babbling, my darling. I'm just going to carry on. Is that okay?
Love it.
One of the things that frustrates me is when I hear parents saying, oh God, you know, they spend their life on the telephone or they spend their life on the iPad. And there's an immediate negative assumption that if a child is spending time on the internet, it's bad time. It's nonsense. You need to find out what they're doing. Mm-hmm. You need to engage in the same way that we need to know what our children are listening to, not in a judgy way. One of the first things I ask with my students is, what music are you listening to? And some of them look at me sideways, and they kind of assume, because I'm 8,050, that I'm only going to be listening to Chopin and Bach. And I'm really fascinated by the music that they're listening to. And we listen together, and if I like it, I'll download it onto my playlist, and they go, what the fuck is going on? This is so there you're integrated. And then I will look at the lyrics, and then we'll explore the lyrics. Now there we're having a literature class, we're having a poetry class. They don't know that that's what they're having. But some of these songs are really profound. Some of them are extraordinary. I remember one child that who loved 21 Pilots, and I love 21 Pilots now. And there was a song called "Stressed Out." I don't know if you know it. It's fantastic.
Not
it's
aware
a
of it.
really, really good song, and it's a song about kids who are battling through the end of their life at school. They're about to go out into the world, and they're shitting themselves, and they're feeling not prepared, and they're looking back on their childhood. It's a beautiful song. It's a hip hop song. It's phenomenal. And right in the middle of it, they're talking about the power of smell and memory. Mm-hmm. And we share that it's two brothers in the song who share the same nose, and they remember that they remember these smells that will only be relevant to them because it triggers a memory. So what do? You move straight off into a class on neuroscience. There it is. It's there. Just asking a kid, what music are they listening to? You can use that as a tool to explore endless different avenues. So don't assume that what they're doing is mindless and stupid. I had a kid the other day who watches endless anime. Not my fave thing.
They're fun, but
they're fine. But and I said to I said, look, I need to understand why you love this so much, because I don't get it. And I said, I'd really like you to give a class. And she went, and I said, no, go away and choose some different anime films, and take me through, teach me. And she did, and it was absolutely fascinating. And I learned a lot about her during that class. There were things that concerned me. There were certain things. There were. She was seeing a lot of stuff for the first time. What I was seeing also was a lot of medievalism.
Right.
Which deeply concerned me.
Well, some Japanese anime are pretty tough.
So what I had to do was to be careful not to generate any negative vibes, but I remember thinking, okay, I'm going to store this away and I'm going to be doing a class. I'm going to be introducing something in history that is going to shine a light, and she will then see that this is not necessarily new. I found the levels of sexism deeply concerning.
In fact, some animes are not made for children. They are actually made for an adult audience.
Yeah, so. I mean, the ones that she was watching were not. That I'm happy to say, if there had been anything really majorly inappropriate, then I would have. But nevertheless, it was concerning. But it was also very helpful because I could see that there were really interesting things about this in terms of how these characters socialized with each other and related to each other. She is an artist, and it influenced her art. She wasn't copying by any stretch of the imagination, but it was acting as a very powerful and valuable springboard for her. So I then went away, and the next class I brought up some TED Talks given by young people. And we looked at those, and then we discussed them in the light of the anime films. So I'd engaged her because I was involved, as opposed to going, don't watch this, it's a pile of bollocks, which doesn't get you anywhere. And I learnt something from it. So I think we need, of course, there are things that are unsuitable for our children, and we should, that goes without saying.
Sure.
But before we judge what they're doing on the internet, we have to be involved in it and genuinely involved, really find out what they're loving. In the same way that we find out what they're loving about the books that they read or don't read.
Right.
There was a fantastic article that I read this morning. Sorry, I really am, darling. It's like verbal diarrhea, but it is associated.
Right.
I read this article this morning written by a teacher who was very frustrated by the fact that a lot of her kids didn't read, and that she had to teach them Jane Eyre or some... I don't know, some Dickens or whatever it may be. I'm not knocking Jane Eyre. It's one of my favourite novels. But you need to be a bit more robust to get to grips with that. Side note, I'll get back to that in a minute. And she was saying, I'm giving my best class ever reading a book that I have never read before. And I was sitting up in bed with my coffee, fist pumping. I was so excited by this because, of course, I do this with my kids. I say to them, "What are you reading? What do you want me to read? What have you enjoyed recently? Introduce me to your." I've read some amazing books directly as a result of my children. What students have given me, and I read them for the first time, and they then see my enthusiasm. I'm bringing with it a wealth of experience and knowledge and understanding, so that I can easily incorporate things that I know I need to teach them, so that they can pass their bloody exams. But they've given me the means to do it. And this teacher luckily had a head of department who said, yeah, okay, well, you let them choose a book and I'll buy it in. And that's going to be the policy of their school from now on. And It's a really good way of doing it, because once you've got them engaged, once they know that teaching is a two-way thing. I mean, if you love learning, then you're going to be a good teacher.
But you think that's what's wrong with our school systems at the moment? That is a very one-sided approach to teaching.
And I feel really, really hugely defensive of teachers. I think they do an incredible job. I don't think, certainly in the UK, I can't speak for Italy, but certainly in the UK, they are not respected members of the community, and they should be. You go to Botswana and you're a teacher and you are hugely revered. In England, not so much. And my daughter's a teacher in a state primary school, and she is incredible. I think that there's some great teachers out there. I think the exam system is impossible. It is ridiculous. It is archaic. It's 19th century. It bears no relation to anything that these kids need to know. And I am so tired of it being accepted that, GCSEs, which in England you take when you are 15. You start your GCSE program depending on between 14, 15, 16, 2-year program. There is not one child that has gone through that system that comes out of it saying, my God, that was time well spent.
Right.
That's ludicrous. It's absolutely ludicrous. And these are kids that should be at their most curious. And we send kids into school very curious. Babies are the most curious creatures on the planet. Little children and babies they are curiosity personified. It's how we learn. And we send these curious humans into our education system, and out comes kids who 9 times out of 10 don't give a monkeys, do not see the relevance of what they've learned, have survived school, and then they have a whole series of choices. That's terrible. It's terrible. We've got to change it.
And where do you think things go wrong? Like, do you think it's part of the system because of the scalability problem to apply to many people and in a uniform way? Or you think that's the problem?
I think absolutely.
The system has become too big maybe to really focus on the individual?
I think 100%, and I think you hit it when you said scalability. And how do you scale children? That we all emerge at different times, at different speeds. The woman that I am now is very different to the person that I was when I was 18, 19 and 20. If you'd asked me when I was 25 if I was interested in science, I would have given you a very eloquent reason why science was of no interest to me and to the rest of the world. I didn't know anything. I didn't know anything. My passion was ignited by reading a book when I was in my 30s that changed my life. I read The Extended Phenotype by Richard Dawkins, and suddenly there was somebody offering me a way of looking at the world that made fundamental sense to me, and so I had to piece it together and understand it. And I studied and taught myself, and it changed my life. And now I am able to combine the arts and science and the humanities and it's a whole eclectic picture. So I'm not an expert in it. Well, I'm an expert in lion reproduction, but I'm not really an expert in very much else. But I've got a very, very broad church of knowledge, so I can pull things together. And that's what makes me, I hope, a good teacher. Because if a kid comes to me and they show me an interest in something, I know how I can link that interest to something that will surprise them. And if you've surprised a child, you've captured them.
So what age do you teach children at?
From all ages. The youngest, with my 7 through to whatever, grown-ups.
Okay.
So I've done the gamut.
So in the beginning you said that raising your own children, they are more robust now.
Yeah.
It's because of. Do you think it also had to do with the practicality of taking on responsibility and really feeling the consequences to? But because today everything is very abstract, and you learn a lot of things that are far away from your personal life. Whereas your situation is very particular that you went to a place like Botswana to live and get raised there. But however, you lived in a real environment and experienced real problems that you had to solve, and the children had to solve. And the direct application, do you think that helped them become more robust?
There is no question about that. Yes. And you used the word responsibility, and I think that's a really beautiful word. And that they did have responsibility, and it was we lived in an environment very close to our Pleistocene environment, our evolutionary environment. We lived in an open camp with no fences, and there were elephant and lion and snakes, and we were living in the wilderness,
right?
And therefore we were all responsible for each other. Now, we weren't in a state of high alarm all the time. We had a very happy,
How did you avoid the lion
time.
just walking in the camp?
Well, occasionally that happened.
It's going to be really scary.
There were very strict rules. They didn't... The lions... I mean, if you've got 5 kids, darling, there's a hell of a lot of noise knocking around. So, they kept a wide berth. But in the evenings, when the lions were active, we would drive... The distance from our mess tent and our kitchen tent to the car wasn't very far. Sorry, to their bedroom wasn't very far, but they always had to take a car. Because lions would wander through. So you were sensible about it.
Did you use dogs as that kind of breed of dog that kind of...
No, and you couldn't have dogs because they're not indigenous. So we were in a real... So we had to be very careful. Things like if you're throwing away your tomatoes, you couldn't leave them on the ground because they would seed.
Okay.
So it was, but the sense of responsibility is really important, and it's enabling, and it's practical, and I think that I see a lot of parents now who feel that the best thing that they can do for their child is to fill their time. So there's violin class, and there's ballet class, and there's judo, and there's this, and there's play dates, and everything is worked out, and they don't have time to think. They don't have time to play. They don't have time to be bored, and being bored is really good for you from time to time. It really is. We need that time to allow our ideas to sediment, and to use our ingenuity and to entertain ourselves. When my granddaughter comes back from school, she's 8, and she's just so cool, I can't tell you. I love her to pieces. And she comes back from school, and you just give her a little snack, and she just wants to sit. She doesn't want to talk. She certainly doesn't want to ask what she did at school, because she's going to tell you nothing. I mean, as all children.
She's going to public school, I suppose.
She goes to, absolutely. She goes to state school in England. And, all children, if you ask them what they did at school, they go, nothing. I mean, without fail. But you can watch her unwinding. She needs that peace. And then she goes to the table, and she has these little dolls and these houses and these little things that she's created, little worlds that and she sits there happily chatting to herself, completely openly, unwinding. And it is beautiful, and my daughter is so sensible, giving her that space rather than going, okay, she's got 2 hours between arriving from school and supper time. How am I going to constrain and control those 2 hours to ensure that she is learning something? She's generating her own worlds. It's brilliant. That's what we need to be giving. We need to give our kids that.
And how do we achieve that, though, on a bigger scale?
It's not the end of the world if a kid says, I'm bored, I don't know what to do.
Right.
And you go, well, what are you going to do about that? I can't solve that problem for you. And I'm not saying that brutally. And they'll look at you and they'll go off and they'll do something. They'll create something. You'll find them, I don't know, building something or getting some old redundant toy out of a cupboard, or making something in the kitchen or doing, they'll fill in those, nature abhors a vacuum. They'll fill that in and they'll have done it for themselves.
But you think parents do that because they are overprotective of the children as well, or they just want to fill up the time because they're busy working and they want to get rid of the children?
Oh, yeah, I think that we've forgotten the incredible value of risk in our life.
Right.
I think we do overprotect.
Because that's what I read in statistics. Me as a child, for example, I was raised in Germany in a smaller town, so lucky enough that it was not a big, busy town, so we could go out, and our parents let us play for hours outside, and we went off and we had forests, so we explored the forest, got lost sometimes,
trees,
but somehow got trees.
Yes, I can see
climbed,
it.
fell down,
Yep.
So it's and you learn a lot through these experiences. You learn to take on responsibility.
Yes.
You learn to cope with dangerous or new situations. I think because we talked briefly about this before, that, for example, suicide rates amongst young kids have gone up, being on social media all the time and not going out anymore. There's a book by, what's his name? Not Steven Pinker.
I love Steven Pinker. Oh, God, what a great man.
It's not Steven Pinker. It's was it Steven Pinker? No. But it was a book about the coddling of the American mind. It's the title. I'm not sure what the author is right now. It will come back to me, hopefully. And he looked into the current generation, and what they're not doing anymore is going out and exploring, and they're being overprotected. And so first time some real stress comes up in their lives, they overreact to it because they're not used as children to cope with it. Yeah. And so maybe that's something that should also be introduced to children again, no?
Yes, I think so. I mean, I think it's really important. And I
love
your description of going out into a forest, because if you're out there with your friends, you're also looking out for each other.
Right.
You're caring. If you see somebody doing something that you think is potentially too dangerous, you're going to be nurturing towards them. You're going
learn to socialize. But
it's fantastic.
Right.
And you have to stretch your boundaries. You have to know what it is that you can, climbing trees and falling and breaking something. And for God's sake, it's not much fun, but
you learn.
Yeah. And kids, when they get cuts and bruises,
right.
You get a cut and a bruise, and you sort it out, and you obviously you look after them, and you cuddle them, and you kiss them, and you comfort them, and all of those things. But they don't need to be frightened by it, because their immune system's going to get to work. Thank you very much. And again, these things where everything is over sanitized, and it generates anxiety. Unnecessary levels of anxiety, and that really does worry me. I mean, I had a kid the other day who was staying with me, sweet little person, and he twisted his ankle and it got swollen. He was terrified. He thought he was going to need an operation. He had gone into worlds of horror, and it was a very simple twisted ankle, and he thought that I was a magician when I got a bag of ice peas from the freezer and wrapped it around his ankle with a bit of old, and read him a story, and a couple of hours later he was back to normal. I was a genius. He didn't have to have an injection, he didn't have to go to the doctor, and I just thought, what's been instilled in this little person, that there was a
But I think it's not a small thing. I think it's a big phenomenon. Most young kids, I think, are overprotected now, at least from what I can see. I mean, maybe in Italy it's a bit different still than in other northern countries, let's say. I see it more and more in Italy we have the phenomenon for our Italian viewers, or our expats here, the mammoni, who are overprotected, sons who are overprotected by their mothers. That's a very Italian phenomenon. And but it's not very healthy. You see that also here in society, people living still with their moms and fathers until they're 30, 40 years old. And it comes back to the lack of taking on responsibility or learning to take on their own responsibility, I believe. It's really bad.
You brought up something that I feel really passionately about, and I'm not in any way. I've only been here in Italy for 3 years. This is by no means a judgment of a culture that I'm growing to love. I see it, this is not just an Italian thing. And I think it's really important that we feminist mothers, my generation of feminist mothers who have raised feminist sons, and we've raised feminist sons so that we can hand them on to women. We hand on well-informed, confident, engaged men. And I love my 3 sons with a passion undying. But what gives me the most pleasure is seeing how fucking fantastic they are with their women. Really amazing. And I love their women. I mean, my daughter-in-law is an extraordinary woman. I could not love her more. And I am very clear about the fact that, quite properly, my son loves his wife more than he loves his mother. He should. He loves me dearly. And he is good and kind and adorable, and we have a fantastically close relationship. But his primary woman is his wife. And were that not true, I would have done a very bad job. So there's no conflict. And she did something. I've written a book recently which has been published about part of our life in Africa, not all of it. And when I was in Africa, I was gang raped, which was charming.
Horrible.
3 men at knife point, and I unraveled. And why I wrote the book, and this does get back to my daughter-in-law. I haven't lost the thread. Why I wrote the book was that I wanted to look at the impact of sexual crime on the secondary victims. Anybody who is living with somebody who is suffering from post-traumatic stress, which I did, is profoundly challenged. So in the case of my children, all of them were at different ages when it happened. So sort of 8 and 14 and 15 and 16. And then Emily was in her 20s. So all of them impacted at different times and in different ways. And they lost their rock because I was fragmented. I didn't know who I was. All those subtle connections that we were talking about in just recently about schooling. I mean, I'm very good at making connections and linking up, it's, and that's all broken. And so though I looked the same, my internal landscape had changed. And they lived with this and with me being volatile and drinking too much and angry and never appropriately focused. So with them, it was a very damaging period.
Oh, so horrible.
Absolutely awful. And when I recovered, and I have, and I'm really strong and happy and healthy and completely back in my skin, I had to, I think the most difficult part of the recovery was actually looking at the damage that I'd done. And for a mother who loves her children as profoundly as I do, looking at how I had hurt them was the hardest thing I've ever had to do. But it had to be done. And I had to look at them and recognize that while I might be talking to a grown-up person, what I had to heal and address was the child in them. And not to ask for forgiveness, not to offer explanation, but to say, I'm really sorry, you did not deserve that. And it took a long time for them to find their feet. And I've never asked for their forgiveness. But what I have is their trust now. And that's the biggest gift. And part of that process, this is now going back to my daughter-in-law, as I got better and they could see me getting better, it was then safe for them at different times to break. And my son broke when he was in America, where he lives. And his wife, with just brilliance, said, "You need your mum. You need to go to your mum." Because she knew that the pain that he was in, he was unravelling stuff that I knew what was in his backpack. I knew what he was pulling out. And he came back for a while, and it was extraordinary and private and beautiful. And then he went back to her, and I stepped back because I'd done what needed to be done. And there was such profound love and respect there. It was so beautiful. And it still, and we love each other very much, Jenny and I. And that's, I think we need to look at the women in our sons' lives as our friends and our allies, not our competitors by any stretch.
So you think generally, there's a problem that we see each other as competitors, as a war of power?
I think that it can be. I don't know. I think competition is a good thing in lots of areas.
I mean, I got raised with a sister, for example. That helped. We competed, but in a healthy way.
Yes,
we tore each other's hair when we were kids.
Absolutely, is part of the human condition. But I don't think you can compete with love.
Right.
None of my children ever had to compete for my love. That was a given. They competed with each other ferociously over other things. And I don't compete with my daughter-in-law because it's a different love.
You say it's a given that for your family, but I think it's also a very particular thing that not every family has, because knowing that you can always count on your mom or your dad, on your family, on your brothers and sisters, is something that's also, if you instilled it from a very young age, you did a very good job. But I don't think many people have that either. Well, having that safety to fall back to the family.
I didn't think about it at the time, but one of the things that I'm reflecting on now, and with the book that I'm writing now, even though it's written like my other one as story, it's not, it's not a memoir as such. It's written more like a novel, and I am. Unlike with Under the Camel Thorn, where I am me and my children are, in this one I've created characters, but basically I know the story very well. And one of the things that I'm looking at is the stories that my mother created for herself. Were a defense against the real problems in her childhood, and the problems of being a woman in the 1950s and the early 1960s. She was also in very important developmental periods in my life. Actually, my mum was not a happy woman, but she was generating these stories of everything's marvellous, darling. Everything's happy. Happy times, happy times. And I knew that it wasn't true instinctively, but I never understood. Now, I was very cross and very intolerant of my mum, and I was fierce and rebellious and a pain in the arse, and was very, very judgmental of her, and tough, really tough. But in reflection, she couldn't give all the love that I needed, because she was holding so much together. All her energy was trying to keep this mythology that she was clinging to like a drowning woman, trying to keep that mythology alive. And I stripped that back. I learnt from that mistake. My mum did lots of stuff that was fantastic, but the stuff she got wrong was really valuable because I decided not to do that. And one of the things that I did was to be piercingly honest with my children. Far too much information a lot of the time, you know, open about absolutely everything, about sex, about this, everything. But really important because it kept all the channels open and there was truth. And I think that really matters. So I thank my mum for teaching me what not to do.
Right.
And I thank her with respect and love.
Sure.
And happily, I had the time in my life. I grew up, and I had the time in my life to reflect and to understand her from an historical context, and to be able to give her the love that she needed, and enable her. And I sound very patronizing, and I don't mean it patronizingly, enable her to keep her stories. She needed to keep her stories. It would have been very cruel to break them. But she certainly felt that the love I gave her by the time I was in my 50s was a real love.
So it's a beautiful thing that you opted, despite the fact that you were rebellious and you were kind of trying to get out of that situation, that you decided that you didn't resent her for that, but actually you learned from her mistakes and turned it into something positive. In a way, you studied her situation.
Yes.
And tried to improve it for yourself and for her eventually as well, I
but
suppose.
It took time. I mean,
Sure.
It took me until I wasn't really into my 50s until I kind of got that. And I was, there were long periods of my adult life where I kept my mum very, very much at arm's length. And I realise now why I did that. I wasn't doing it in a punishing way. I think because I was growing up and raising a family, it's not easy. And if I'd added the complexity of my relationship with my own mother at that time as well, it would have been a bit too much.
Right.
So it was like, you just got to take it one step at a time. And, to be absolutely honest, both my grandmother and my mother, I think if they'd had the choices that women have now, they would have both had abortions. And good luck to them. I mean, I'm very glad they didn't for obvious reasons, but they did not have autonomy over their bodies. So if you're a 21st century feminist, you've got to apply that same understanding to your women in your family. And they, my grandmother was a bloody nightmare. But she didn't want to have kids. She was a crap mother. Quite staggeringly awful. She was a terrible grandmother too. And there was a very funny, but when she was awful, but when she was with my mum, when my grandmother was really quite old and she had an operation, she was home with my mum, and it was, she really didn't last very much longer after that. And mum came in and said, "My darling, I'm going to give you your tea. Would you like a biscuit?" And my grandmother said, "Well, I'd much rather have a biscuit than a baby." And and it's been a family saying ever since, "I'd rather have a biscuit than a baby." And it was true. That was a glorious, she was well into her 80s, and this was this deep, fundamental truth of hers that came out, in her sort of ancient delirium. It was brilliant, and it was vividly honest. And I think that's what's been interesting as a 1960s feminist, and I am now in my 60s. So it's looking back at the women who have been in my life and have obviously influenced me. my grandmother born during the First World War, my mother born between two world wars, me born into the 1950s, the holy hell for women, just horrendous. All of that was conspiring, and I need to look at their lives and give them the dignity that I would give women who are alive now, and understand their problems from a feminist perspective. And it's made it really exciting.
So speaking of feminism, also another thing we spoke about briefly before we came down to the studio booth here. Do you think feminism today is different than the feminism that you were raised with?
I think it's for me it's very straightforward, which is about equality and respect, and equal pay for equal work, and for an acknowledgement that men and women are different. Of course, for God's sake, how glorious that those differences are. But that there is nothing bloody magic about being a woman, and that you are not having an XX chromosome doesn't mean that you've got fairy dust, and that immediately you are going to adore every child, the thought of having a child, and that you are going to adore scrubbing floors and wiping the shit off your ancient parents' arse. It's not going to happen.
Right.
It's tough being a carer, and women, we are feeling the brunt of generations and generations and generations of oppression. I'm sorry, but we are. Politically, women have been up shit creek without a paddle for a long time. And does being a feminist mean you hate men? Not in the slightest bit. Love them to pieces. Do I love the politics? No. Do I love the way that males have imposed constraints on women and continue to impose constraints on women? And look at what is happening in Georgia. We have women who will be sent to prison if they have an abortion. I'm sorry.
In the state of Georgia?
It's monstrous. It's absolutely monstrous. So we've got a hell of a long way to go. And I'm sounding a bit angry, and I'm sorry about that, because I don't want to be angry. But there are certain things that are just so rotten that they make you angry.
Right.
It's a state of being. It doesn't mean that there's it really matters to me. And I believe, I was talking to my niece the other day about this. She's the same age as Emily, my daughter. They're both 40. They've both got kids. They're both deeply happy in their relationships. And they are actually the first generation of women who have got partners who were raised by feminist women. That's the difference. My generation of men were not. And no matter how adorable they are and how lovely and how loving and how kind and how fantastic and all of those things, they don't speak the language. Whereas my son's generation do. They speak the language because I taught it to them. And I think that the younger generation, the sort of between 20 and 30s, that generation of women, the sort of the pink protest, the Me Too, all of this is incredibly valuable, and I hugely admire what they're doing. But sometimes I feel that they are reinventing a wheel that's already been turning very, very smoothly. And I think they just need to just look a little bit back at my generation, who we've been fighting for the same things and we're still fighting for them. And that makes me bloody sad. Very, very seriously sad. And it means that I am as active and engaged in the process of feminism and in that journey as I was when I turned 15. But from a wiser and well-informed place. And, this, without being kind of, I've kind of gone through pretty much the gamut of the kind of shit that can happen with women. I've had 6 babies. One of my babies died, which is just as crap as it gets. I've been raped. I've been involved in some very tricky stuff with men from time to time, not the men who are the fathers of my children, who are lovely. I have to say that very, very quickly because I don't want anybody to misunderstand that. But I've been in some physically abusive situations, so I kind of know I know what's going on a bit, and I want to contribute to that. I want to contribute to this journey. And I think that we've gotten a bit ageist, I think, about it.
Really?
Yeah. And that makes me a bit sad.
Ageist in the sense that if somebody who is considered older by the young generation is being shushed down because of their age?
Well, yeah,
ageism
in my personal experience, no, not at all, because I don't innately, there is no ageism. And my mum didn't enable ageism. She was fantastic. She just, if you were a human, you were fascinating to her. And I loved her for that. And she was one of the most welcoming people in the world. And I've got that. So I haven't experienced ageism in my personal life. But yes, I do from sometimes in a sort of externally. And I think that's sad because, in the olden days we used to talk about, the maiden, the mother and the crone. And I'm a crone now and I love it. I love being a maiden. Well, not that much, and I love being a mother a lot. And being a crone is fantastic because it's not that you're imparting your wisdom and you're not saying, I know the answer. What you're saying is, I've been through these problems. So I can understand and I can identify, and I'm still thinking about it. And this worked for me. It might not work for you. Please don't do this because it was a huge mistake. Let's not all get run over by the same bus. We can work together. And I think that's really important. And it's what I'm trying to do with my books, is to sort of do this cross-cultural stuff. And I'm really chuffed that the Under the Camel Thorn that's been read by men who really loved it. They really loved it because that's not an angry book. This is not a book written by somebody saying, how could men do this? No, not at all. It's a piercingly honest book about the mistakes that I made. And it was very enlightening to a lot of men who got it, who actually understood the nature of what it is to be a woman. I mean, we talk about this, I don't know how open one is allowed to be in this podcast, but
very open.
I think that it's really important that we talk to our sons about sex.
Right.
It's really important. Because how are they going to know about a woman's body? Yes, of course they're going to learn, but wouldn't it be great if they didn't have to fumble their way through it? God knows. I mean, my mum, when I talked to her about it, darling, don't worry, the man knows what to do. Well, bollocks. Absolutely, it took me years to discover that they didn't have a clue. And then once I participated and made a few adjustments, things improved massively. And I wanted my sons to know and I would say, this is the story of my body. This is what I like. And these are things that you can, these are ways in which you can give a woman pleasure. And I think that's really important. I mean, the birds and the bees has got to be a proper grown-up thing. Now, I'm not suggesting you do that when they're 10, for crying out loud. Bloody useful to have those conversations before they go off to college. And one of my sons, and I'm not going to tell you which one, but one of my sons rang me from college and said, "My girlfriend thanks you very much." Really? Which was brilliant. Yeah. But, it's not, you've obviously got to do it with a light touch, but these are things that are really important. So that, I remember also one of my boys, a girlfriend of his arrived, and I knew that they were going to go steaming upstairs to have lots of glorious adolescent sex. And I went into his room, which was an absolute tip. And I called him and I said, "How dare you put clean sheets on the bed and tidy up your room? Respect this woman who is going to allow you into her body. Thank you very much." There are some practical things too. "Mum, you're absolutely right. So sorry." And, it's important. Really important.
I wish I would have had kind of an introduction when I was a younger kid. I mean, I was raised in Germany, so Germans are quite open about sexuality in general. So we learned it at school and everything. My mom, she works with the Catholic Church. You can imagine that wasn't quite the best playground to have the mother-son talk. Yeah. And my best friend at the time was a Muslim, so you can imagine in his family,
oh my gosh,
there was no big, a Kurd actually, a Kurdish Muslim. So a very peculiar situation. But we had one friend who knew everything, and he told us everything back then. So, but the rest, as you said, we fumbled ourselves through eventually. And I apologize with the first few.
My darling, and I apologize. I also apologize to the poor men that were dealing with me, thinking, well, if I lie here, something marvelous is going to happen. Nothing, So I think that being open. I also think it's really important that we're open about motherhood and childbirth. My mother told me that having a baby was like having a big poo. I'm sorry. I hate to think of the condition of her colon.
Right.
I mean, just terrifying. So I'm very honest with women because it's a terrible sort of, it's almost like a collusion. It's brutal what happens to a woman's body. Now, there is a incredible courage about that. Something happens inside you because you go, well, if I can do this, I can do anything. It's staunch stuff. But you get ripped apart. And by someone that you love already. It's very confusing. And we have to be very generous to women who suffer from, say, postnatal depression. I was really lucky. I never did. But I count myself as lucky. It's shocking giving birth. And, with my sixth, it was, they don't slip out, my darling. I can tell you. It was the worst of all of them. And it was really, I was frightened. I thought I was going to die. And then an hour and a half later, you've got this little person in your arms that you worship. But no, it's brutal. And these are things that need to be explored, and we need to be honest about it, and we need to prepare. I remember being really shocked when I had my first child. I just felt betrayed. Now, it was a particularly difficult labour. He was born upside down, and it took 48 hours. Ow. Not much fun, but it was still that thing of, why didn't somebody say, if the medicine's going to taste nasty, tell me. I'll still take the medicine, but don't lie to me. And I remember thinking, I'm not going to engage in this collusion with other women. And I think that women can be very brutal with each other. I think they can be very judgy. And that needs to stop. I mean, when I was working with the lions, for example, breastfeeding, okay? I've had enough milk for an army, all right? I was lucky. Others that I know don't. It's normal. Lions are exactly the same. I spent hours and thousands upon thousands of hours observing lions with their cubs suckling, and there were those females in the pride that would suckle everybody else's cubs, and there were others that they just didn't want to know. They'd snap at them, they'd slap them away. They just weren't producing. That wasn't their function in the group. And we're tribal, and we have shared our breasts with other people's children and babies for thousands of years. It's only comparatively recently that we've gone, mothers have sort of got intimate to do all privates. This, what is that about? And it places women under terrible pressure, terrible judgments. It's not kind, it's not fair. We need to be kinder to each other.
So is there a stigma out there if you're not breastfeeding at the moment, or?
Well, physiologically, breast milk is fantastically important for babies, and it's really convenient and it's fab if you've got it, and if you haven't, you're not a failure. You're a human being. We're all varied, and we've just got to get rid of all this notion of perfection. And be tolerant and recognise the differences and some women don't bond immediately with their children. This doesn't make them bad mothers. They're going through a journey, and they need to be supported, not judged and penalised.
And where do you think this help should come from, though? Because ideally it would be the family, I suppose, who's helping them.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
we don't. That doesn't happen so much now.
Or the community, but the community is also fading.
Exactly, and so there is where the negative part of the internet that you were talking about earlier. There's where it comes in. There's where it's judgy. The photographs that go onto Instagram and the photographs that go onto Snapchat and Facebook, and they're all about, look at this perfect cake that I've baked, as opposed to look at this fucking disastrous
which
meal.
you probably bought downstairs or here and just put it on the table. Oh, look what I did.
So we have to stop. We have to be a lot more honest about that. And just kind. That's it. I think that's as simple as that. Just being a bit kinder, and recognizing that everybody's different.
But do you see that happening, though? Because what I observe these days is like there's an outrage culture that's getting more and more aggressive and more, or it seems like, because it gets amplified much faster. It seems like everybody's pissed at each other at the moment. But
there is a lot of anger knocking around. Of course there is, and there's I think there's some very well-focused anger. I think there's a lot to be angry about. I think the Greta Thunberg is absolutely right to be angry. I think that a lot of and in fact, to be fair on her, she's not angry. She's articulate, incredibly articulate, and her judgment is appropriate and accurate. So no, it was very unfair of me to use that word. She's not angry. She's massively impressive. I think that there are very, very, very serious errors, and I think my generation have made them. We have not been quick enough. We've not been paying attention. In some ways, I don't blame us, because the speed of change, we've never encountered this speed of change in human history before. Right. We've encountered these problems before. Damn right we have. There's an amazing documentary by National Geographic called America Before Columbus.
Mm-hmm.
And it is incredible about the environmental damage that took place during Europe. Well, we decimated it. We decimated the land and the sea and the rivers, and we buggered off over to go and decimate somewhere else. So we've done this before. What we haven't done is at this speed. And the young are rightly angry. So there is righteous anger. And then there's just piddling, ungenerous human rubbish.
Sure.
And I do think that being kind is the most. It is so potent, so potent.
It's also the only way to really win the hearts of another person.
Yes.
If you want to have a civil conversation, you can only have it if you both agree to sit down and talk. And so maybe you are diametrically opposed to my opinion on whatever topic, whether it's in politics or environmentalism or whatever it is.
Yeah.
But first of all, we have to sit down and get to know each other and first see that we're both human.
Yes.
And probably we're going to find out, and I think in real life that's what most people find out actually when they sit down in a bar together or meet up whatever and have a discussion, a conversation, that actually the other person is a good person too.
Yes.
It's very simple very often. We want to have
Very
food, drink,
simple.
eat, be happy, have a partner maybe not, and be happy. That's all.
That's it. And it's one of the things that I love about being here in Rome is that I see a lot of kindness. And I am told by Romans, what are you talking about? We're real tough. Everybody's. I see. I've never been happier in a city in my life than I am in this city. I see kindness and thoughtfulness and fun and sharing.
Right.
I've shared with complete strangers one little moments. It's a very, very, very profound city to be in, this one. And it's easy to be kind here.
Right.
I mean, when I very first moved here, I went to the little shop up the road, literally the day I moved in, to get some staples, and they didn't use a card. It was cash only.
Okay.
And now I'm in a big city here. Picture my surprise when the sweet man, it's okay, don't worry. You take this and you come and pay me tomorrow.
What?
I went, what?
Where are you?
Is this?
Where are you going shopping?
It was just in Via della Lungara. It's a little simple shop run by his son and father. Oh, darling, it was just the most wonderful welcome. And of course I went and paid them.
Right.
And I shopped there ever since. What trust that was.
Rome is a very peculiar city, and many call it actually a big town, because very often it feels more like a town.
Yeah,
it's got a bit of both.
It's not got very defined boundaries. They're sort of fluid, and that enables you to be organic and to be responsive and for things to change and be on it, and it's okay. And as long as, luckily, having lived in Botswana, if things are slow here, if I don't know, somebody said to me the other day when I was getting a phone put in, oh God, you're going to have to wait 6 weeks. And I thought, sweetheart, I've waited 6 months for things. 6 weeks is fantastic. I don't worry about all that. Right. You just have to go. It's not gonna, okay, fine, just wait. But I think it's those simple human values that are really, really, really important. And I think, going back to that thing about women, is that if women can be kind to each other and not judgy, and I think that women who go back to work with children are pioneers, and I think they're brave, and I think they're doing really important things. They must not judge those women who choose not to do that. those women who choose to stay at home with their children and to raise their children are not by definition boring, thick and unadventurous. Absolutely. There has to be. And those women who choose not to have children, please let's not bang on and tell them what they're missing, because they're not. Let me share this with you, darling. I am really happy I am loving my life at the moment. All my children are grown up. I don't have a pet and I don't have a man. It's fucking amazing. It's great living without.
You should get a cat, though.
I don't want to have to feed anybody or think about it. I love that freedom, and I think to myself, this is what women who choose not to have children have. Good for them. So we must allow all those wonderful differences and not be judgy.
That's why I asked in the beginning also what does feminism mean to you, because I've seen a few videos where feminists basically are accusing each other of having hijacked the movement, and some basically judge women that are staying at home, for example, as being backwards and whatever, and the other way around. So it's
absolutely. I think it's all about choice.
Right.
If a woman is staying at home because it is expected of her, and she is somehow magically going to love every single second of what can be grindingly boring. Anybody who tells you that raising young children some days are bloody boring, darling, and repetitive. Right. Yes, and we've got to be able to acknowledge that and say that, for goodness sake. So women who choose to do that should not be. There needs to be a choice. And that's what matters. Right. It's having the choice. And for those choices to be respected. That's what feminism is, I think. Right. And it's really, really important. And I made choices. I gave up a very successful career as an actress. Because I wanted to be engaged on a day-to-day basis. Having said that, I did a lot of other things. So I didn't give up my career because what I loved more than anything in life was picking bits of Lego up between my toes. Not true. So that's when I started studying, and I was intellectually very vivid and engaged. But what fascinated me was that I remember I had a successful career. I was invited by the Royal Shakespeare Company to play Olivia in Twelfth Night. Because in those days I had a bit of a name as a telly actress. And fantastic, lovely, wonderful, loved to do that. They told me what my fee was going to be, and I said, I can't do it. Love to, really want to. I can't afford to do it for that fee, because I'm going to have to pay for somebody to look after my child while I'm working, and I'm going to have rent to do this and da-da-da. And I was rung up by somebody I knew as a hardcore left-wing feminist woman who said to me, "But Kate, you're married. Surely Peter is going to be able to contribute." And I said, "Just excuse me. You are asking me to do my job. You are going to pay me to do my job. Whether I'm married or not, it's got nothing to do with it." And I turned it down, and 3 days later they came back with the money I wanted and went off and did it, and fantastic. But what? I will never forget that as long as I live. I was icily angry about that. Doesn't make any difference whether I'm married or frigging not. You're paying me for my work. And we're still fighting this battle. To this day, we're fighting this battle. And women doing the same work and not being paid the same as men. It's absurd. Because they might go off and have a baby. I mean, I know, I'm sorry. I mean, it's no good waving my hands around while, we're doing something on the radio. Because nobody's going to know. But it is just insanity. We should not be punished for our biology.
Right.
It's an absurdity.
But what are solutions, though? Like raising the pay
Scandinavian countries have solved those things perfectly well.
What are they doing right now?
Sorry?
What are they doing?
Well, they provide paternity leave, maternity leave.
Right.
Everybody's given space
and Germany
and time
have the same thing.
Yeah,
maternity leave.
Civilized for crying out loud.
Right.
There's no drama about it, but we should, every working environment should have a creche or a means for women to be able to bring their babies to work and their children to work when they're small, and obviously then they go on. I mean, of course, schools at the moment are basically being used as childminders. It's nonsense. It's absolute nonsense. We're feeding children into school in England much too early. I think in Germany you go when you're 7, don't you?
6 or 7. Yeah,
in
with 3
Russia
you're going to the
it's
kindergarten.
7. We just need to have a much better system, and it's kind of ridiculous that in the 21st century we're still having this conversation. And that makes me that makes me sad. That makes me sad, and that makes me feel that my generation has failed.
Is it a money problem in the end? Because if everybody got paid more, I suppose we all wouldn't have to kind of shove our children into.
No, I don't think so. I think a lot of women go, they love it and they want to, and they're engaged and they're contributing to society. I don't think. I mean, yes, it'd be very nice to be paid more, but no, I think we should just be providing. It should be just like we provide lavatories, for God's sake. People have babies and children. It's a bodily function,
right?
And we just should be doing that. And we shouldn't be grateful for it. It should just be part and parcel of how any business and corporation designs itself. It's very dull that we're still having to fight for this. And I remember with my daughter, who was not earning a huge amount of money, training to be a teacher, and she had to put her daughter into childcare, and the woman that she is incredible. This woman called Leslie Ann. I love her to pieces. She is just a goddess. And her fees are very fair.
Okay.
I am not for 1 minute decrying the fees that she charges. They are appropriate. But my daughter's not earning the kind of money that she really had to. It was a colossal challenge to meet that. Now, this is ridiculous. This is ridiculous. Right. When she is training to be a teacher, they should have provided at the university. They should have provided for free the means by which she could have brought Eliza into a safe environment in the same campus.
Right.
Where Emily could be learning how best to teach other people's children, while her own little person was just around the corner. That seems to me a sensible way for a government to function.
Right. Do you think the government is ever gonna?
Well, darling, I don't know, because our government's broken. Ours is. Well, I don't even know.
What's going on there?
Darling, don't even talk. Talking about kindness,
right?
And what's going on in my government at the moment, which is just farcical. But there's something when Boris Johnson's brother walked away. Whatever I think of Boris Johnson, and whatever I think of his brother, I feel really sad for both of them. That's a human story. That must have been really, really difficult. There will have been a lot of tears there.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And And I hope, I don't think it's going to happen, but I hope that that public, painful
point of
it's
view,
a
hurt humiliation
is not going to
also.
be used against him. I hope not, because that's a human. Now, I think the political decisions that he's making are disastrous, but that's a bit of his human story, and I think we have to be careful about unraveling that. And I think nowadays, what you were talking about earlier about the internet, because it's we can remain anonymous, people can be very, very cruel. But then they always have been. Nothing's changed. We've just got a different way a different method of doling out the cruelty.
I think the big difference, like somebody said, Twitter is basically all the toilets in all the world in one feed, because also you have to, what people don't get sometimes, normal people don't usually leave a bad comment. Normal people usually just watch it, they appreciate it, and that's it. Usually it's just the maniacs who feel a strong reaction by whatever you wrote, they feel triggered by it, and then they leave some bad comment and try to get under your skin.
But then
and so
you
you
just
have a whole
reply.
No, of course,
It's
that's
easy,
the same,
isn't it? You just don't reply.
That's a theoretical thing, but it gets to so many people, and it becomes like a whole.
I see. If somebody starts, writing. I mean, it's not. If somebody wants to engage in a discussion, then that's lovely. But, and
doesn't happen a lot.
You can tell whether there's a. But if somebody writes something, either I just don't take any notice, or I block them. It's easy.
Right.
It's not a drama. I don't go to myself, oh my God, I'm under attack. I don't feel violated.
But see, you were
by
raised
that.
without technology. You were raised with real problems and real solutions, and so you have you learned how to socially deal with situations.
Yes, a very good point.
And I think that's a danger,
that.
and you talked a bit about it before. That's what I meant when I said there's a danger in social media. If once we realize what it is, and we will figure it out, and we will teach our children how to cope with it from a young age. But right now, I think it's still everything's possible. Everything is kind of left to their own devices.
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of young people are struggling because they don't have any points of reference from us, because we didn't know the technology that way.
That's a very, very good point. I hadn't thought of that. I think you're absolutely right. And I think we do need to guide our children. I mean, I was very, when we were living in South Africa at one point, Oakley, my youngest son, was, I can't remember, darling, how old he was. I think he was about 10 or 11, 12, something along those lines. Anyway, phones came out with cameras.
Wow.
I know. And I wouldn't let him have a phone with a camera because people were really abusing it. It was pretty hideous what kids were doing, taking photographs of, and I'm glad that I did that. And it was fine, and he had his own little phone, and that was fine. And then when he was 13 or 14, then he graduated to a phone with a camera, because now all phones have got a camera. So we have to teach them. And I think, as you said, as we catch up with the technology, we're getting better at teaching our children and preparing our children. And it's certainly one of the things that I do as a teacher, is I really go through very carefully what's good and bad manners. Like, you don't have your phone, no technology at the table.
Right.
And it's important.
First, we'll have to figure out ourselves how all this technology works.
Yeah.
And where the dangers lie, and where the potentials and the good sides are, and then start passing that on to the next generation, making sure they all don't.
But it's not going away. I had a class the other day with a kid who was convinced that he hated science, and
Really?
and it was a Skype class, and I said to him, "Do you know that you're made of stardust?" And he went, "What?"
Whoa!
And I was able to pull up in 30 seconds a wonderful little video. It's only 4 minutes, and then he was engaged, that every single element in his body was created in these incredible structures. At that point, he was now, oh my gosh, how wonderful was that? It was in less than 5 minutes, this little person who was in Nizhny Novgorod in Russia was on the edge of his seat. Thank you, Internet, for the wonder of that moment. I will never forget it.
So, but that's because you have a personality to listen to people and you are curious.
Very.
So how do we, to get back to the beginning, how do we scale that to the whole school system or to all children all over the world? Because you are like that. Many teachers, if you were teaching probably at the public school would probably be a much better place than it is now. How do we get?
I think there are one teaching in public schools who are constrained, because if I was teaching in a public school, I wouldn't be allowed to do a lot of the things that I'm doing. Right. Not because what I'm doing is bad, is because if you've got a class of 30 children, it's not possible. So I think that we need to engage our children in their education. I think they need to have a lot more control. I don't believe in totally child-led education because they don't know enough to ask a lot of them. Our job is to keep giving them tasters. It's like a smorgasbord, isn't it? I've mispronounced that, but it's like going to a banquet, and you taste this, and you taste that, and you taste the other, and then you come back, and then maybe when you're a little bit older, you find that I didn't like that then, but I like this now. That's what we need to be doing. Right. And at the moment, it's linear, and everything is separated. Not at primary school. The minute they get to secondary school, history and physics, totally different things. Sorry. You've lost the humanity of it. Niels Bohr, what a man, what a story. What's going on now with quantum physics and biology? Incredible. These are creative, poetic, wondrous adventures. We need children to see that everything is interconnected.
Right. Well, I think we've been covering a lot of material. Is there anything else that you want to talk about?
Oh, John, you know me, I could go on all night. I've had such a lovely time, and thank you very, very much.
Maybe you can tell our viewers or listeners, depending on what medium they're consuming this episode of the Heysal podcast, where they can find your, the book you wrote.
Yeah, it's called Under the Camel Thorn Tree, The Impact of Trauma on a Family, and it is available on Amazon. And iBooks and various other outlets. It's Amazon, Amazon.uk, and also Amazon in South Africa.
Okay, well, I'm gonna make sure to include all links in the all the links in the YouTube description. So if you have any other things, any websites or social media?
I'm on social media. I'm on Twitter. My handle is Frankie Furbo, which is one of my favorite books. And I'm on Facebook, but that's private. Because I don't. And I'm on Instagram. I'm not brilliant at it, my darling, but I enjoy it.
All right.
So there's that, and I'm building a website at the moment.
Great. All right. Well, we're looking forward to also read the new book once it's ready.
Thank you, and thank you for
Kate,
this.
thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much.